Microphone is working. Excellent. Okay, so a little bit about myself. So I have a bachelor's of science in technical writing with a minor in computer science. My college mascot is a Scotty dog in a kilt, and the mascot is the kilt, not the Scotty dog. I have a master of business administration, various certifications from Amazon, Microsoft, SEI, PMI, et cetera, et cetera. None of them are particularly noteworthy. Because I have 20 years of experience in platform as a service, that is primarily what I do. So most of my certifications are Salesforce, ServiceNow, more of the higher level programming languages. And what I do is I focus on integrating emerging technology into enterprise application platforms. So I talk to developers who, or companies or organizations who want to integrate some kind of emerging technology, generally in the healthcare space. And it is my job to know more about that subject than most of them. So, by all means, there are absolutely experts who know far more than me about any topic that I know about, but I know enough to be useful to enterprise organizations. So it works out. Okay, so moving on to ChatGPT. What we're talking about today is ChatGPT for business from a developer standpoint. You can look at the Eugene Slack channel. I believe there's a post out for a seminar or a series on ChatGPT for business from the business side, and I will be talking about some of that. But just some terminology. So generative pre-training transformer, word salad basically means what you do is you put in some kind of words and ChatGPT spits out the most likely response to those words that you put in. If we assume that the most likely response to a question is the correct answer, which is usually true, then we can assume that the response is going to be the correct answer. Okay? It is by no means always true, and if you ask a better question, you will get a better answer. And if you tell it how you want that question answered, it will answer that question in the way you tell it to, because that's what you would expect when you tell something to answer a question in a particular way. So the key is chat. You give it a question, you give it a response. You give it another question. You put that entire context back into ChatGPT every time. So it's called the context. That's the history of your chat. It can be a short chat, a long chat. Every time you ask a new question, you put the entire history in. It responds with the most likely thing for a person or whatever you tell it to play as to respond. And that context just continues to grow. Okay. So generally speaking, there's one API. You give it text, it responds with text. And then there are some flavors on top of that and some other things that it does. But that's pretty much what it does. Training works exactly how you would think. Given a bunch of input, what is the correct output? And you put that into a neural network black box. It chugs for a while, and it figures out, given some input that was not in the original training set, what is the most likely output to include in the training set. So it's important to know a little bit about the behind the scenes because it helps you understand how to program a ChatGPT agent, and it helps you to understand how to formulate your questions in a way that is going to give a good output. And it might help fix the clicker. Clicker is not working. Next slide, please. Okay. Let's see. Where do I need to stand? There we go. Okay. Point it at the computer. Okay, got it. So I do have source code out on GitHub. That's the QR code for it. That's the URL for it. What I'm talking about today is chat.openai.com is the public-facing, pay $20 a month, and you can use ChatGPT. Platform.openai.com, pay a penny per request or less, and you can make API calls to ChatGPT. Generally speaking, if all you want to do is chat with it, you're better off using their UI. It's a really good UI, and they do a better job of programming the user interface than you're likely to. But you don't want to try to screen scrape the user interface, so they have an API available for you. Also, I originally wrote my code in Java because I like Java. Then I copied my code into ChatGPT 4, the paid version, told it to rewrite it in Python using LangChain, and it did. And it almost worked, but 15 or 20 minutes later, because I know how to program Python and because I knew what I was trying to get, I was able to convert from my Python application, my simple Python app, or excuse me, simple Java application to a simple Python application. Probably saved me an hour or two of work, which, at minimum wage, it paid for itself in a day. So, pretty good. So I'm going to talk about 2 use cases today. The first is formatting a resume. Okay, that's part of this GPT for business. Why are resumes good? Resumes are just text. They, generally speaking, do not have pictures. Everything the model needs to know and everything you want the reader of the resume to know is probably included in the resume. Okay, so not a whole lot of room for hallucinations, not a whole lot of room for problems. There is potentially a little bit of context, right? You can read between the lines. This person has had 3 jobs over 10 years in Milwaukee. Chances are they are going to accept a job where they can either work remotely or live in Milwaukee, right? So GPT can make those kind of inferences. The idea, though, is you want to make the inference using the information that you give it. You do not want to have it make inferences using information that it knows from the Gestalt global black box world. Okay, because if you do that, the best you're going to get is an average response, and that may or may not be true. So the model here is, given a PDF of a resume, could be a text document, could be a Word document. We're going to convert it to text. Then we're going to take a prompt, and the prompt is going to be reformat this resume and make it look pretty. And you're going to get some text as output, and then you can turn that back into a PDF using publicly available libraries. Okay, so step 1, convert the resume to text. Notice the formatting is gone. There are bullet points at the beginning of every line. The bottom of every page has my name and phone number and everything. So not a great conversion to text, but okay. There are applications out there that can do a better job, but by and large, this is just a stream of consciousness, what was written on the page, top to bottom, left to right, spit it out there. Okay, step 2, creating a prompt. You are a recruiter for a Fortune 500 IT department, so tell it who it is, okay? That's additional context, additional information. Reformat this resume to be easy to read. So I've told it needs to reformat it. I've told it I want to optimize for readability. Use only information provided in the resume. That may or may not work. Okay. Do not add information or use information from other sources. Again, may or may not work. We'll get to that in a moment. Be concise. The word concise, for some reason, is important. It works really well. Use business formal language. Tell it how to do its job. Include 4 sections, a 2-paragraph summary, blah, 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 blah. Format your response in Markdown with the first header at level 1. Enclose your response in response tags. And then I give it the resume in the body. Okay? Enclosing the response in response tags lets me use a simple regular expression and strip out all of the chatty junk that these APIs like to add. So I like to use the Claude API, and this is actually a recommendation from them. It works pretty well with ChatGPT as well. And those with ChatGPT, you can generally tell it not to add a preamble. Claude kind of ignores that. I'm sure they will improve, and that's one of the rooms for improvement that I'm sure we'll see coming in the next 6 months to a year is better APIs that are less chatty, that just return what you want. ChatGPT has already handled some of that with their functions capability. Okay, step 3, call ChatGPT. ChatGPT takes an array of messages. So a message is a role and a content. So it just takes a JSON structure. Open squiggly bracket, role, colon, system, assistant, or human, or system, assistant, or user. Content is just a string. Claude, for whatever reason, uses new line, human, space as its delimiter. Or new line, assistant, space as its delimiter, which is a different type of structure, very much like JSON. It's just using a much more complicated delimiter with some information in it. But it still works. It's all the same stuff. It all is just text getting stuffed. That's a LangChain term. Stuff the text into the API, and it gives you a response. So step 4, Profit. I use CommonMark in Java to convert Markdown back to HTML. Works great. Use a tool to convert from HTML to PDF. So I like iText. I like the ASPose APIs. They're a little squiggly to work with, but it gets the job done. And they are quite reliable, and they're available for Java, and they're updated frequently, and there is help available if you ask hard. But if you make a stupid mistake, ChatGPT will not necessarily warn you. I told it that it was a Fortune 500 recruiter. I told it to be concise. I told it to use only information that I had provided to it. And it gave me a resume that would absolutely get me a job. It gave me the resume for a senior staff engineer at Google and stuck my name on it. Probably not what I wanted. Okay, I tell a story, company I work with, manager is showing me, we're trying to build resumes. We're a staffing company. We want a resume. Here, I'm going to show you something really cool. Make me a resume for Benjamin Franklin. And it spits out a resume for historical Benjamin Franklin. It says, isn't this so cool? No, it's not cool. It was wrong. It was objectively wrong. It gave you a resume for a person who doesn't exist, using historical information, which philosophically you could argue that person never existed. You are a recruiter. You should not give this to a customer, right? This is a bad output. But because he didn't give it enough context, he didn't tell it how to behave, he didn't give it context, he didn't tell who Benjamin Franklin was, it didn't ask questions, it just gave the response that it thought you wanted. You can, by the way, tell ChatGPT to ask questions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so problems with ChatGPT. There are lots. Hallucinations, exegesis versus eisegesis, okay, philosophical terms. Are you going to produce the content using the context that you provided, or are you going to produce content about the content that you provided using your general knowledge? If you do not provide enough content, ChatGPT will attempt to produce what you asked for. That's its job. It's good at it. Consistency of results. It is non-deterministic. ChatGPT-4, somebody told me, I don't know whether this is true, is just 8 different ChatGPT-3s lined up. I don't know, but consistency of results. It's just a lot of random numbers behind the scenes. It's going to give you something close to the average. If you call it multiple times, you might or might not get the same response, which might or might not be good. Reliability of formatting. If you are not very specific, and even if you are very specific, the format of the resume that you put in, the order in which things show up, the way in which things are bulleted, even the style of the bullet points will be inherited from the input. So it can be very hard to control the formatting of ChatGPT output. Accuracy of answers. Again, is it telling you the truth? It's giving you an average response. On average, the expected response is the correct response. But there are absolutely situations where the expected response might not actually be very good. Precision of answers. ChatGPT doesn't really understand anything, so it doesn't necessarily care what the correct answer is, right? So if you ask it how many planets there are and it says 9, well, how hard was it really trying? Maybe it's out of date. Maybe it was just giving you an average response. Maybe it forgot about Pluto. Maybe it has political opinions and wants NASA to crash and burn. I don't know, because it's not giving you all of that background. Access to context data. It only knows what you give it. Lack of training material. If you have not trained it, then it doesn't necessarily know anything that's not in context. Then the speed of APIs. ChatGPT really, really slow. Okay, for a single request, a human going onto the UI and pasting something in, you get the response back fast enough. Okay, there's two reasons for that. One is you're a human, not a computer, so fast enough is generally fast enough. Another reason is marketing. They take your money, they're probably running a loss, I would guess, and they're giving you a really good response time. The APIs do not give nearly that good a response time. So if you are a recruiting company, trying to process resumes, you want to process 80,000 resumes, it's going to take you a few hours. And if you didn't write your prompt correctly, and you didn't write a very good prompt, it could take you a few hours before you realize that 10% of your resumes are incorrect. You need to rerun the prompt, and you need to run it again, and you're going to pay for all of that, both in terms of time and a check written out to OpenAI. So that can be an issue. Okay, so step 5, profit for reals. If you actually put the resume in, what I did was I had a typo in my template. I put my resume into the code, and I just had, I think I had a mismatched bracket or something, and I just didn't actually put the resume in the first time. So ChatGPT is good at extending, correcting, and augmenting. But it gets really cool when you mash up contexts. So the next use case is, now that we have a clean resume that's gone through ChatGPT, let's do something actually useful with it. Okay? So I'm going to give it a prompt. You are a recruiter for a Fortune 500 IT department. Write a 1,000-word cover letter explaining why this candidate is the perfect person for this job. The job does not yet exist, so you will need to also explain why this job would benefit. I put Peace Health. Okay? So real company, not a real job. As far as I know, I haven't looked. Maybe it is. And in fact, the cover letter does explain why I should be hired for this job. Why should they make this job? And then so on and so forth, give it all the information. Claude actually did a better job. Claude by Anthropic actually did a better job at this than OpenAI did. Okay, so again, consistency of results. Claude likes to say that, I heard a rumor, I'm not sure if it's true, I haven't bothered to research it, that Anthropic is kind of like the OpenAI of Google. I don't know if that's actually true. But Claude definitely is trying to be more trustworthy, and they're trying to give better, more trustworthy results. Yeah, I think that's probably true. I have not run side-by-side testing, but I will say ChatGPT tends to give wilder results. It tends to give more interesting results. It tends to come out with more responses that I just don't like than Claude does. And Claude tends to give more reliable and predictable and trustworthy, in my opinion, results as a human. Now, again, always have to watch out. There's a lot of stuff going on under the hood that they are not telling you about in how they train it, what content they use to train it, what kind of feedback was used, how exactly they are making this more trustworthy. You don't know, and it's not, generally speaking, published and available to lay people. Okay, so that worked out really well. I have the source code for both of those use cases on GitHub, and you can download that. Works in Java, works in Python, and there's a README file that you can look at along with all of this presentation. So, second use case, chatting with PDFs. I have a bunch of documents, and I want to ask it questions about those documents. So a good example, does my health plan cover hearing aids? What types of hearing aids are covered by my health plan? What brands and models of hearing aids are covered? So useful information, not always obvious, and maybe a little tricky, because if your health plan does not tell you what brands and models are covered, which, spoiler, generally speaking, they don't, will it answer truthfully or not? Good question, and there's research and development being done on that right now. Okay, so some more terminology. Embeddings and vector databases. So embeddings are the other big API that people use. Embeddings are, given a chunk of text of any size, I want to get back a list of numbers. usually between -1 and 1 or between 0 and 2, depending on the API. It's important that you always use the same API and the same model every time you ask for an embedding. And an embedding is a position in mind space of that document. Okay, so an example here in 2 dimensions, what hearing aids are covered by my plan? That's the question. It's in the upper right-hand corner. Nearby documents. The XYZ plan covers most unfitted hearing aids. The XYZ plan covers hip replacements, etc. The ABC plan pays for annual doctors. Different plan, annual, not cover, not specialized coverage, nothing to do with hearing aids. So if you think about it, the y-axis, the up and down axis, might be specialized coverage, and the x-axis, the y-axis might be relevance to hearing aids, and the x-axis might be coverage, right? Is this a specialized coverage or not? Okay, you could think of it that way. You'd be wrong because that's not how it works. Okay, but it is sort of. So 1,500, I think 1,530 something dimensions in the OpenAI embedding API represents a space in n-dimensional mind space. And you really don't know what those dimensions stand for. You don't know what a positive number is. You don't know what a negative number is. You just know that you have a point in space. So what you do is you put your question in, you get the embedding back, and you have a database with all of the embeddings from all of the documents that you've put into the context. And you tell the database, give me back the 5 documents that are closest to this question. And it gives you back those 5 documents. And then you use that, the ID that it gave you, and you take that chunk of text and you put it into the context. So remember, a ChatGPT context is just a sequence of role and content, just a lot of text. So you just put all those chunks into the context, and then you ask it its question, and it will answer the question with that context in mind. And that's how you get good responses. For those of you who are fans of ancient history, that's Google search. It's all Google search was on day 1, was a massive vector database containing a lot of web pages. They've gotten better since then. So step 1, build the database. Convert your document into text, just like we did with the resumes. You're, generally speaking, going to go page by page through a PDF, so you get an embedding for each page. Why do you get an embedding for a page instead of for a document? Because generally speaking, embeddings are more useful if they refer to localized content. Also, ChatGPT and every GPT has a context window. There's only so much stuff you can stuff into that context. OpenAI, it's something like 8,000 or 32,000 tokens, which is, a token is roughly 4 characters on average. So call it 100,000 letters, roughly, depending on how much you're paying and which API you're calling. Claude is 100,000 tokens, so call it roughly 400,000 characters. And that's it. That's all you can, that's the only context you can put. If you want to ask a question, it has to be answerable using the information you've stuffed into that context. So split up the document, obtain an embedding for each page, stick those embeddings in a vector database, move on. Move on. Okay, step 2, search the database. Take in your prompt, your question, convert that question into an embedding, put that embedding into the database, get back the 5 nearest documents. Take those 5 nearest documents, put them back into the context, put the question at the end of the context or the beginning, and it's all in how you format the prompt. And it will answer that question in the context of that document. So, like I said, build the prompt, inject the document chunks into the prompt along with that question. Click, and then answer the question. So parse the response, extract any structured content, and so forth. So, how can you improve on that? Because you have a limited context. ChatGPT, OpenAI, has come out with an API, the Functions API. You can tell ChatGPT, here's the kind of information or the kind of question that you can ask. and you can put the question in, and you can surround it in a prompt that says, if you need more information, ask for that information by calling these functions. Those functions will return back to your application. This doesn't necessarily run on the ChatGPT servers. It turns back to your information and says, hey, ChatGPT is asking for this function to be honored. You honor that function, you take the results, you stuff it back into the context, and you run the context again. Functions could also be used to take an action, right? Turn on the lights in the room, book a reservation for a room, book me an appointment with a real estate agent, right? Anything like that. So those functions can do things, or they can ask for more context. You can also mutate the context. Every API call is unique and uses only the context that's given it. So if you give it a short question, you could say, hey, ChatGPT, here's this question. Do you need any more information? If so, tell me what more information you need. And then you can give that back to the customer and say, hey, customer, please answer this question. Customer answers the question. Then you make another API call to ChatGPT with the answers to that question. You could also say something like, ChatGPT, do you need to know this customer's identity? Do you need private, privileged information about this customer in order to answer the question? Right? Maybe you're a hospital or a doctor's office, or you want to answer questions about their actual insurance plan. ChatGPT can call a function called get user identity, and then you can go through an identification process, right? You can use OAuth, or you can ask for a phone number and a last name and a zip code, or whatever your policies require. Identify the customer, go into your SQL database or whatever you use on the back end, extract a hunk of data about that customer. What insurance plan do they have? Do they have any dependents? How old are they male or female, which can be relevant. Did they purchase the hearing aid add-on, or did their company purchase the hearing aid add-on? Right, all of that information, insert it into the context, and make another API call. You don't necessarily have to chain the context. You can either make a completely new API call, or you can just add to the context, or you can modify the original part of the context. Python LangChain in Python has an agent concept that can help with that and can automatically execute those functions, get the data. And it has some agent functions where you can pass it a connection to a SQL server and just say, here's a SQL Server connection, deal with it. It will actually introspect column names and table names and things like that, and then be able to answer questions, what is the average age of the customer? Now, again, always very, very interesting. If you work for a cheese shop and you have a column called preferred age, well, is that the actual age of the customer, or is that how old they like their cheese, right? ChatGPT is going to try to answer that question. Did it answer it correctly? I don't know. You should probably tell it, right? Don't take chances there. Okay, so conclusion. I already talked about some of the conclusion. Maybe I'll talk about more. Maybe we're out of batteries. Okay, so where I see things going. APIs will mature, models will become more important. This isn't really a hot take. This is what the CEO of OpenAPI is saying as well. There's only so many words in the English language. English is not a particularly good language for this use case. That's why ChatGPT is coming out with functions, right? Let's maybe be a little bit more explicit about what we're talking about. Maybe let's tag. If we're giving it a person's name, maybe let's put tag it in some way. Maybe like we could write name and maybe surround it with angle brackets or something like that, saying, you can patent that, you can use it, free concept. Add tags to notate your documents. So I think that kind of thing is going to become more popular, and the concept of just asking free-form questions will still be there, but that's what's going to be exposed to the public. There's going to be a ton of formatted data. Function calls going back and forth where ChatGPT or any GPT will know what kinds of questions it can ask, and it will get better at asking those questions, and it'll get better about asking back-end systems and back-end databases without talking to the user. Um, in my opinion, entirely in my opinion, and nobody else's because I haven't asked them, I think OpenAI has a better API. It makes more sense to me. Anthropic Claude tends to give what looked to me like more trustworthy responses. Their API, frankly, looks a little Mickey Mouse, but that's fixable, right? Delimiters are delimiters, whether it's a XML tag or a JSON structure or a /n/n human colon. Yeah, that's also hard to say. Amazon Web Service is focused on providing tools to call any number of models. I have not seen that they've come out with a published API, but honestly, I haven't checked in the last week, so maybe they have. Google Palm focuses more on citations, seems to have an okay API somewhere between Claude and OpenAI, but they're focusing more on the search results, right? Surprise, that's what Google does. Citations are important. And we can talk about some concepts about how you might use citations and how you might use that agent concept to do useful things with citations. And then there's also a lot of really fun examples of people, especially lawyers, doing really stupid things with OpenAI and getting bitten by citations and how easy it is to not make that mistake. But we'll do that afterwards, and we can just have an unstructured talk if we want. So like I said, I think structured access to data will become more important. OpenAI steered conversations, functions, structured input. People get better at adding context. So lessons learned. Writing good prompts is critical. Having good pipelines is even more critical. The context drives the output. You get really cool things if you say, write me a cool story. Because what would you expect if you asked someone to write them a cool story? You would expect a cool story, right? You tell it, impress me. You will get the response that you would expect if you tell somebody to impress you. Doesn't mean it's useful, right? Somebody suggested tell OpenAI, you can do better. Okay, that will actually cause it to rethink. What you will get is the output that you would expect if you tell someone to do better. Right? They'll think about it a little bit harder, and you'll get that output. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea, but it is important to remember that you added to that conversation, right? You added information. You implied that it was incorrect in some way, or you implied that that response was incomplete. As a result, it gave you a more correct or more complete answer. That's what you would expect. GPT is an expectations meeting machine. You can also do better by giving it better prompts up front. So give it better context, tell it what you want, and that way you don't have to tell it to do better. It just does better on its own without a second iteration through that loop. Create escape hatches for unexpected business situations, or use something like functions, which are structured, right? You can tell whether a function was properly understood. The OpenAI documentation still has some notes there that you might get back malformed functions because, again, ChatGPT doesn't understand structure. It doesn't understand the concept of code. It just understands that, hey, if you ask it for some code, it's probably that you probably want code back. It doesn't understand what that code means, not yet. Context size is a limiting factor. We talked about ways to deal with that, right? You can have a context window. You can rebuild the context each time. Structured interaction is a challenge because you still can't quite really predict what you're going to get back from ChatGPT with 100% reliability. Better prompts will help with that. Better coding will will help with that. Error handling will help with that, et cetera. And the big one for me, because I work with enterprise companies, who's actually going to be around in 12 months? Is there any point in writing something using the Claude API and taking it to production if it's just going to get replaced in 12 months? Okay, remember, I work for enterprise companies. I don't work for product companies. Enterprise companies have short-term projects. This is a 3-month project to do this. If it breaks, they're going to make a point-in-time business decision. Should we spend another month of money, or should we just throw away the 3 months of sunk cost? right? They're not trying to make a long-term product. Okay, lots of philosophical conversations you could have about corporate enterprise and things like that, but very different from product companies. So I don't know who's going to win the AI battle. I don't know even within any of these companies who's going to win the AI battle. I don't know how much a single API call is going to cost in a year. Are costs going to go down or are they going to go up, right? Is this company that I'm working with going to go out of business? If they do go out of business and I am able to just switch because I use something like LangChain to a different API, is the response going to be so different that parking lot? Like, I don't know. I have no way to predict that, and I would like things to be more predictable. So, thank you. GitHub URL, QR code to the GitHub URL. Oh, this will come up again. So tools I use, because I am in business, I pay for the tools that I use. I do use open source, but I do think it's important the things I'm talking about, you understand how much they cost. I use Salesforce and ServiceNow, both breathtakingly expensive. Talend, very expensive. Of course, laptop operating system, Office 365. I use IntelliJ IDE, a few $100s a year. GitHub Copilot, which is really good, mostly. 10% of the time, it's just not useful, but it does tend to get better over time. You have to give it 10, 15 minutes or an hour of working in your code base, and it'll learn your code base and start giving really good advice. I use GitHub. I mostly use Bitbucket, Snowflake for data warehousing and analytics, Databricks for data science, Fivetran and DBT for shuffling data around, Postman for API stuff, Gitkraken because I don't like command line, but Gitkraken works very well. Tools I use for AI, OpenAI, ChatGPT. So there's the ChatGPT API. There's the ChatGPT embeddings API. There are some others. There's a training API, and there's a completion API, and things like that. I don't generally bother with them. Anthropic Claude only has a completion API. I have not bothered with Google PaLM or PaLM 2, which is the AI behind Bard. I use Pinecone as a vector database. Can't necessarily say I recommend it. Works really well. It's not expensive. There are other vector databases around, and unless you're dealing with very, very large databases, you don't really need a hosted server or anything like that. But many people do. I use Amazon for the most part. We use Microsoft Teams for transcription. I've done some interesting experiments with taking the transcriptions from Microsoft Teams, pasting them into a chat context, and then asking Claude, who was in this chat? What decisions were made? What risks were identified? What was the tone of the chat? What action items and next steps were identified from this chat? Things like that. And again, if you're using something like LangChain, it handles concurrency and all of that pretty well, so you get reasonable performance. But again, it is really slow. So trying to put this in front of a salesperson or any kind of business user, you kind of have to manage expectations. You can easily, if you have a large resume or a complicated document of any kind, you can easily end up with a 5-minute timeout, and that really does not play well in presentations. I use Vaadin, don't love it, but it gets the job done really well now that I know how to use it. Python, really don't love it, but it really gets the job done now that I know how to use it. And DBT and Snowflake. Snowflake and LangChain work together really well because Snowflake works well with SQL Alchemy, performs very well, acts like a SQL database, but is not ACID compliant, so you don't have to worry about those performance impacts. Okay, and that is the actual last slide. Thank you.